The definition of a good photo is always going to be at least a little bit subjective, but at the same time, you know one when you see it, even if you don't know exactly what you like about that photo. It could be the color, sharpness, or clarity. Maybe it's the moody nature of it. Maybe it's more vibrant, maybe more of a natural feel. You like what you like, but if you gathered up a collection of your favorite photos, there would probably be some common denominators. So today we're gonna go over a few shooting and editing techniques that put you on the right path to taking clean, attractive photos that stand out. And along the way, I bet you'll start to realize what it is that really draws you to a particular style of image. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I'm Chris Hagan, a video producer and photographer in Portland, Oregon. But I recently returned from a quick trip to New York City where I was absolutely spoiled by beautiful sun and cityscapes to make fun photos. And a few things dawned on me in the process of shooting and editing that I wanted to share with you. Personally, I like to be inspired by images created with the same tools I own. Kind of lights a fire for me. And the Threads algorithm has absolutely locked on to serving me photos from lots of talented creators that shoot Sony and Fujifilm like I do. But then, somehow, I find it hard to emulate the photos I really love. Now, part of that is location-based, especially right now in Portland, where sunny days are few and far between. But often it's technique, and New York helped open my eyes to some of them that may help you too. The first is one that especially works well with full-frame cameras and low-aperture f2.8 or better lenses. Shooting wide open to isolate your subject. It's definitely not some novel or original technique, but it does work, especially in crowded situations where you want to keep the image clean and eliminate distractions. It's also worth noting that the longer the focal length, the better. 70 millimeters at f2.8 is gonna give you more subject isolation than 24. And prime lenses are even better, even if they're not as versatile. When shooting with my 85 millimeter in Italy and Switzerland, I could turn the crowded streets of Rome and Florence and Lucerne into images featuring only what I wanted them to. The next works for any camera with in-body image stabilization and a photographer with at least somewhat of a steady hand, using motion blur to eliminate distractions. So we know that if you want a sharp photo of a moving subject, you need to increase your shutter speed. The faster the subject, the faster you need to be. On average, I'd say 1/200th of a second is a really safe spot for everyday photos, helping compensate for any movement by the photographer and freezing the action for average movement like someone walking. But we're gonna reverse that here and slow the shutter speed down a lot. I'd say start at 1/15th of a second, but it's worth pushing it even slower if you can. And a pro tip, if you're having trouble keeping your camera steady enough, try using a railing and pressing the camera down to keep it stable as you take the photo. Maybe lean on something. You can press the camera to your body. You can even use your forehead as another point of contact when you're looking through the viewfinder. Even set your camera on the ground if it's safe enough. Or if you don't mind carrying a tripod, this is literally what they're created for. You'll also need to raise your aperture quite a bit, like f11, f14, f16, to take light away, because as you lower your shutter speed, you're allowing more light into the image. You might even need an ND filter if you're doing this during the day. Lucky for X100 users, we have one built into the camera. Anyway, lower that shutter speed as much as you can while keeping the camera steady, and you'll notice that anything moving in the frame is now blurred, often creating a little bit of a streak across the frame. It works well for people in crowded spaces and cars in busy streets. So as I took pictures of still subjects like Madison Square Garden or the New York skyline or anything that wasn't moving, they stand out even more. And overall, it's just a unique style that you don't see quite as often, and I've gotten more compliments on these photos than just about anything else. The next technique is a lot simpler, and before we get to it, a reminder, if you're finding this video helpful, Hit that thumbs up button before you go and subscribe to the channel for more photo and video tips, reviews, and opinions. And while you're down there, let me know your ideas. How do you create clean images? Let me know if I left something out, because I'm sure there are others that will probably want those ideas as well. So yeah, look, the next tip is simply to take your photos toward the sky. Now, this especially works in a city loaded with skyscrapers and tall buildings, or your typical downtown area, but it can work anywhere you find interesting structures, because you are removing the distractions by keeping them out of the image altogether. No street level pedestrians or traffic to clutter things up when they're below your lens. This is also an example of using negative space in your photos. And honestly, there may be nothing cleaner than an empty sky or big block of your image that makes your subject stand out. And the sky doesn't just work for buildings. If you get down at a low angle, you can often use the bright sky to create contrast with your subject. And speaking of contrast, that's the next on the list, specifically contrast between highlights and shadows. This technique is best executed through a combination of both the photo capturing and editing process. Certainly, if the lighting is right, you may not need to do much in the edit, but it depends on the capability of your camera as well. Basically, you're using the light available to accentuate one part of the image while the shadows darken another. And since our eyes will naturally be drawn to the light and the shadowed area is basically a negative space, you're getting a pretty clean shot. This was another technique that Manhattan made very available because of all of the shadows being created by the tall buildings during the afternoon and sunset. The key for me, and what I think was tasteful, was allowing the photos to still look natural. Our eyes have a lot better dynamic range than camera sensors, so I didn't want to totally crush my shadows to the point where you can't see any detail there. While shooting, I overexposed a little bit, keeping detail in the shadows and knowing I could bring the highlights back down in post. And the results were images that show off the Manhattan cityscape and buildings, while also keeping an area of the shadows that looks natural but also does a good job of hiding distractions. It is kind of a weird thing to explain, but I hope kind of seeing this helps. You kind of have to shoot for the edit and have an idea of what kind of flexibility you have in post. The Fujifilm X100VI sensor did an even better job than I thought, because I had even more room than I thought to bring up the shadows a little bit more if I wanted to. Finally, and I don't know the technical photography term for this, but using shapes and hard edges and leading lines that have clear definition can also help create clean shots. Hard light through windows and around walls or columns is really useful in these scenarios. But more than anything, just look at what's around you. Corners, both indoors and outdoors, using foreground elements to create a frame for your subject, stairs and railings. There's a lot that can help here. The moral of the story with all of these techniques is that you just need to know what to look for. Not all of these can be applied to every setting or with every camera or every lens, but the more we learn our gear and its capabilities, and the more we train our eyes, the better we become at finding these images that we've probably overlooked in the past. Thanks as always for watching. Again, holler if you've got any other tips and tricks that you want to share on this subject, and what's helped you make some of your best images. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if this video helped you, and I'll see you in the next one.